Fantasy Football T5 League Yearly Review.
All right, we have matchup number 9 of our wide receiver 1 elimination bracket challenge. Now this matchup pits Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals up against Drake Landon of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, going into this matchup, one thing that I wanted to consider was some of the off-season moves each team has made up to this point, so we can kind of determine if there's going to be any takeaways and opportunities. So let's go ahead and start with the Atlanta Falcons. So when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons off-season offensive moves, they really haven't done much. They did re-sign 2024 Pro Bowler Kadarius Hodge to a 2-year deal. Now, he was a standout special teams player for the Falcons. He also has worked hard and made his way into the rotation in the wide receiver core, so he'll be seeing some field time next year. When it comes to the mock drafts, right now there's a lot of projections that the Falcons are going to be focused on going after Will Johnson from Michigan, cornerback from Michigan. And then I have seen a few where in the second round, they go after Iowa State's Jaden Higgins, who's a wide receiver. So that would greatly give them an additional presence on the outside of the numbers. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see them go for one of those type of receivers in the second or third round this year. Now that could have an impact to Landon, but let's see what happens on the Cardinals side. So when it comes to the Cardinals, they've been a little more active when it comes to off-season moves. They signed offensive tackle Jay Curran to a 1-year deal. They signed Evan Brown, who's projected to be the starting left guard, at least right now, to a 2-year deal. They signed Jacoby Brissett to help back up Kyler Murray at the quarterback position. And they also signed wide receiver Zay Jones, who's expected to be a day 1 starter, along with Harrison and Wilson for the receivers. So Zay Jones is going to be the outside on the left, Harrison will be outside on the right, and then Wilson's going to be able to go back into the slot where he works best. When I looked into some of the mock drafts for the Cardinals to kind of get a better understanding of where their focus might be, a lot of the information was bolster that defense. They go real hard in the first few rounds on defense, so that means the first offensive pick would potentially be round 4, which is highly unlikely to have any sort of impact on Harrison's projected opportunities. All right, so we've discussed some of the offseason moves that each team has made so far. At this point, we'll jump into the stats and we'll do our compare and contrast. So Harrison Jr. last year, he ended up placing 30th in the player rankings, which was pretty disappointing for many fantasy owners. He had 9 weeks where he was a bust and 2 weeks where he was a boom. His best game came in week 2 against the LA Rams. This is a week where he had 4 receptions for 130 yards. He had 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. He finished the game with 29 fantasy points, a season high. Now, one thing I want to bring to your attention about that specific game is the 8 targets and the 4 receptions. Efficiency is going to be a common issue that you're going to see between Murray and Harrison as we look at the season totals. I do recall in some of the games watching them, they just seemed like they couldn't connect, and Harrison might not have been as physically prepared to deal with those cornerbacks as he was expecting. But let's shift over to Drake Landon. Landon, on the other hand, finished 5th in the player rankings. So we have a top 5 performer, and this is what's really interesting. He had 3 weeks where he was a bust and only 2 weeks where he was a boom. Now, when we really start diving into the statistics here, we'll see that his best week came in week 18 against Carolina Panthers. This is a week where he had 10 receptions for 187 yards, 2 touchdowns on 18 targets. He finished the game with 40.7 fantasy points, which at the end of the season really helped elevate him into that top 5. He was very consistent throughout the year. You'll notice there's several games where he's posting 17 plus points. So it's a well-deserved player ranking that he ends up receiving. Let's go ahead and do the comparison between the season totals, and then we can have our discussion and make our decision as to who we expect to advance to the next round. So for Marvin Harrison Jr., he ended the season with 62 receptions, 885 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 116 targets. This was good enough for 196.5 fantasy points in that 30th ranking we discussed earlier. Drake Landon, on the other hand, finished with 100 receptions, 1,271 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, 158 targets. This was good enough for him to get 280.8 fantasy points in that 5th ranking at the player position. Now, the one thing that really excites me about this comparison here is the number of targets. I think Landon is most likely going to see 150 plus targets again this year, which means a ton of opportunity as well, as long as he can stay healthy and on the field. While Harrison, with the arrival of Jones, he might see a little less action, might take on more of a role player to really allow Wilson to work the middle of the field. Trey McBride, his tight end, who probably will end up being a top 5 tight end when we get into those stats. Let him work and do his thing. And then, of course, Jones is going to be able to offer some additional outside or inside help. So the 116 targets for Harrison, unless we see an incredible efficiency in the receptions, which lets him stand out as that number 1 option, I'm not expecting him to see more targets. Actually, I would expect he's probably going to get the same, if not 110, so a decrease there. Now, this is all very important, right? Because we need a good delivery system, and we've discussed that with Calvin Ridley in the situation with Tennessee. So Penix Jr., I think, played very well coming in for Kirk Cousins. As long as he stays healthy, I think Landon is the clear-cut favorite to advance over Harrison. As much as people favor Kyler Murray, I'm just not the guy that's ever been on the Kyler Murray bandwagon. I think that his size, though he does a great job and he's extremely physical, does kind of prevent him from making some of the important downfield throws when he's stuck in the pocket in comparison to like scrambling out and getting that extra, couple steps to move into the throw. But if you disagree, feel free to leave a comment in the video. More than happy to hear your opinion. And so with that, we are selecting Drake Landon to advance to the 2nd round. Marvin Harrison Jr. to the bench. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't consider Marvin Harrison Jr. because it's highly unlikely he's going to end up 30th. We should see an increase, but I don't see him breaking the top 15. Landon, on the other hand, he's primed and set up. He may end up number 1 next year. We'll have to find out. All right, so as always, thanks for hanging out for the video. Leave a comment, a like. If you disagree or agree in the comment section, break it down for us. And then we'll see you for our 10th matchup, which is going to be a fun one. Not sure how close it's going to be, but we only have 6 more before we jump into the 2nd round. And that is where we're going to have 2 matchups in one video. We'll do a quick breakdown so that way we can wrap this thing up and move into the next position. Thank you. See you on the next one.